The stars looked the same as they always did through the viewport of the TCS Valiant. Captain Jake Bennett sat in his command chair, watching the endless black stretch before him. His ship was 3 months into a routine patrol along the outer rim of human space. Nothing ever happened out here. That was the point. "Captain, I'm picking up something strange," said Lieutenant Maya Singh from the communication station. Her fingers danced across the controls, her face creasing with confusion. "It's a quantum fold transmission. Multiple sources. I've never seen anything like this." Jake leaned forward. Quantum fold transmissions were expensive and rare. They bent space itself to send messages across impossible distances. Humanity had only figured out the technology 50 years ago. "Can you clean it up?" "Working on it, sir." Maya's hands moved faster. The ship's computers hummed as they processed the signal. "Sir, this isn't human. The encryption is completely alien." The bridge went quiet. In 300 years of space exploration, humanity had found plenty of dead worlds and ancient ruins. But living aliens? Never. The galaxy seemed empty and humans had gotten comfortable with that loneliness. "Get me everything you can," Jake said. His heart pounded. This could change everything. Maya worked for 20 minutes before the first coherent sounds came through. The speakers crackled with voices that weren't human. Some were high-pitched whistles. Others were deep vibrations that rattled the bones. There were clicks, hums, and sounds that had no earthly comparison. "There are at least 40 different languages here," Maya said, her voice shaking. "Captain, I think this is a distress call." Jake stood up. "Send it all to Earth. Mark it Priority Omega. Then wake up Dr. Morgan." Dr. Lisa Morgan arrived on the bridge 10 minutes later, still rubbing sleep from her eyes. She was the Valiant's xenolinguist, brought along because regulations said every deep spaceship needed one. Until now, her job had been completely pointless. "Play it again," she said, sliding into the seat next to Maya. They listened to the alien voices over and over. Lisa's fingers flew across her tablet, comparing sound patterns and mathematical structures. The computers helped, but it was her brain that made the connections. "They're desperate," Lisa said after an hour. "I can't translate everything yet, but the emotion is clear. They're begging for help." "Help from who?" Jake asked. "I don't know yet, but whoever they are, they're losing. Badly." Back on Earth, Admiral Kyle Harris stood in the war room deep beneath Geneva. He was 58 years old with gray hair and scars from the colony wars 30 years back. He'd thought those were the last battles humanity would ever fight. Now he wasn't so sure. The alien transmission played on every screen around him. Hundreds of linguists and scientists had been working on it for 3 days. The Terran Coalition Council sat around the massive table, their faces grim. "We have a partial translation," said Dr. Lisa Morgan through the video link from the Valiant. She looked exhausted. "It's not perfect, but here's what we know. There's something called the Galactic Assembly. It's a government of hundreds of alien species, and they're being destroyed by something called the Void Collective." "What's the Void Collective?" asked Commander Amy Price, Harris's second-in-command. "A species that consumes others. They assimilate technology, biology, everything. They've destroyed 200 worlds in 6 months." Lisa paused. "And the message mentions Earth specifically." The room erupted in shouts. Harris slammed his hand on the table. "Quiet!" When silence fell, he looked at the screen. "Why would they mention us? We've never even met them." Lisa's face was pale. "That's the interesting part. According to this, the Galactic Assembly has known about us for centuries. They've been watching us. They classified us as primitive and quarantined our space. We were never supposed to know they existed. Those arrogant—" Amy started, but Harris held up his hand. "Keep going, Doctor. The message says they were wrong about us. They need our help. They're begging us to come." Lisa looked directly at the camera. "Sir, they're dying. Billions of them. And we might be their last hope." The council debated for 6 hours. Some wanted to ignore the message. Why should humanity help those who had hidden from them and looked down on them? Others argued it was a trap. Maybe the aliens wanted to destroy humanity before this Void Collective could. Harris listened to it all. Then he stood up. "I joined the military 40 years ago to protect humanity. That's still my job. But I also remember what my grandmother told me. She lived through the climate wars, saw humanity almost destroy itself. She said we survived because some people chose to help others even when it was hard." He looked around the room. "These aliens treated us badly. They ignored us and called us primitive. But right now, they're asking for help. And I think we're better than they were. I think we should answer. The vote was close, but it passed. Humanity would answer the call. The mobilization was incredible. Every shipyard in human space roared to life. Warships that had been in storage were pulled out and upgraded. Factory stations pumped out fighters and drones 24 hours a day. Marines trained for combat in alien environments. Engineers worked until they collapsed, then got up and worked more. Admiral Harris stood on the bridge of the TCS Indomitable, his flagship. Around him, 500 warships hung in space. Behind them, 2,000 support vessels carried supplies, troops, and medical facilities. It was the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled. All ships report ready, sir, Amy said. Harris took a deep breath. Somewhere out in the dark, aliens were dying. Species he'd never met were fighting a war against an enemy he didn't understand. Every instinct told him this was insane. But his grandmother's voice echoed in his mind. Signal the fleet, he said. Set course for assembly space. Maximum speed. The stars stretched into lines as the fleet jumped. Humanity was no longer alone in the universe. And somewhere in the darkness, the galaxy was about to learn what humans could do when someone asked for their help. Jake Bennett watched the massive fleet arrive in his sector. The Valiant was tiny compared to the warships that now surrounded it. But he smiled. 3 weeks ago, he'd been running a boring patrol. Now he was part of something that would change history forever. Take us in, Maya, he said. Let's go meet our new neighbors. The journey to assembly space would take 2 weeks. 2 weeks for humanity to prepare for a war they'd never asked for, against an enemy they'd never seen, to save people who'd never respected them. Admiral Harris watched the stars rush past and wondered if they'd be enough. Then he remembered the determination in every human face he'd seen during the mobilization, the mechanics who worked until their hands bled, the pilots who volunteered knowing they might never come home, the scientists who solved impossible problems because giving up wasn't an option. Maybe humanity was primitive by alien standards. Maybe they didn't have the fanciest technology or the oldest civilization, but they had something else. They had the stubbornness to help even when it was hard, the courage to face the unknown, the refusal to let others die alone. Harris smiled grimly. The galaxy had called for help. Now it was going to learn what humanity really was. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel near the Kelthera system. Admiral Harris gripped his command chair as the stars snapped back into focus. What he saw made his blood run cold. Kelthera Prime was burning. The planet's once blue surface was covered in black patches that spread like disease. Around it, hundreds of alien ships fought desperately against dark vessels that seemed to absorb light itself. The Void Collective had arrived first. Sir, we're being hailed, Amy said. Multiple frequencies. The assembly forces want to talk. Put them through. The screen flickered. A face appeared that was definitely not human. It had 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern, with skin that shimmered between blue and purple. When it spoke, the translation software turned its musical tones into English. Unknown vessels. This is Commander Vesh of the Assembly Defense Fleet. Identify yourselves immediately or be fired upon. Harris stood straighter. This is Admiral Kyle Harris of the Terran Coalition. We received your distress call. We're here to help. All 4 of Vesh's eyes widened. Terran? The primitives from the quarantine zone? The alien's face shifted through several colors. You shouldn't be here. You don't have the technology to... An explosion cut him off. On the screen, one of Vesh's ships broke apart as a Void Collective vessel tore through it. We can argue later, Harris said. Right now you need help. Are you going to accept it or not? Vesh's colors flickered rapidly. Finally, he settled on a deep purple. We accept. But stay in formation and follow our tactical protocols. We've been fighting wars for 10,000 years. Don't interfere with Captain Bennett, Harris said, cutting off the transmission. You're up. Show them what we can do. Jake Bennett grinned from the bridge of the Valiant. His ship was fast, small, and packed with weapons that the assembly had probably never imagined. Squadron, follow my lead. Let's go hunting. The Valiant and 20 escort frigates broke from the main fleet. They accelerated toward a group of Void Collective ships that were surrounding an assembly cruiser. The enemy vessels were organic-looking things, all curves and biomechanical growth. They moved in perfect synchronization like parts of a single organism. They're adapting to the assembly's attack patterns, noted Lieutenant Sophie Turner, watching from her fighter. Learning their movements. The assembly ships are too predictable. Then let's be unpredictable, Jake said. All ships, attack pattern Chaos 7. The human ships scattered in every direction with no apparent plan. They fired missiles that corkscrewed randomly. They used their thrust in ways that should have torn the ships apart. Some ships flew backward while shooting forward. Others spun like tops while dodging. It looked insane. That was the point. The Void Collective ships tried to predict the human movements but failed completely. Their perfect coordination became a weakness as they crashed into each other trying to intercept ships that weren't where they should. Jake's ship dove under a Void vessel and fired every weapon at once into its belly. The alien ship shuddered and broke apart. That's one. Sophie's fighter squadron hit next. They released thousands of tiny drones that acted independently, each one making random decisions. The Void ships tried to track them all and couldn't. The drones swarmed over the enemy vessels like angry wasps, finding weak points and exploiting them. Within 10 minutes, the Void Collective group was destroyed. The assembly cruiser was saved, and Commander Vesh was watching in complete shock. "What did you just do?" Vesh asked, his colors shifting wildly. "That wasn't tactical. That wasn't strategic. That was chaos." Harris allowed himself a small smile. "Welcome to human warfare, Commander. We don't do predictable." The main battle began an hour later. The human fleet crashed into the Void Collective forces like a hammer, but it wasn't a neat, organized hammer. It was messy and brutal and terrifying. Human ships used ramming as a valid tactic. They fired kinetic weapons at relativistic speeds, turning simple metal slugs into planet killers. They released clouds of mines that actively hunted enemies. They even had ships that were designed to be piloted into enemy vessels as massive bombs. General Peter Collins led the Marine forces on one particularly brutal boarding action. His troops cut through a Void ship's hull and fought hand-to-hand against creatures that were part flesh, part machine. It was ugly, close, and violent. The assembly observers were horrified. "Don't they have honor?" one alien officer asked Amy. "Don't they follow the rules of engagement?" Amy looked at the alien like it had grown a second head. "Rules? We're trying to win a war, not play a game." The cultural clash was immediate and severe. Assembly species had spent millennia developing warfare into something almost civilized. Battles happened at scheduled times. Certain weapons were forbidden by mutual agreement. Ships that surrendered were taken alive and treated well. Wars ended with negotiations and treaties. Humans had grown up different. Earth's history was written in blood. Every major advance in human civilization came after a devastating war. They'd learned that wars weren't won by following rules. Wars were won by being willing to do whatever it took. "They're going to use nuclear weapons inside that nebula," an assembly tactical officer reported, his voice filled with horror. "But our ships are in there too." "Then our ships better get out," Amy said calmly. "We warned them 30 seconds ago." The nuclear weapons detonated. The nebula lit up like a new sun. 3 assembly ships that hadn't listened to the warning were caught in the blast and destroyed. But 20 Void Collective vessels were also obliterated. Commander Vesh confronted Harris after the battle. "You killed your own allies." "We gave them warning," Harris said, his voice hard. "They didn't listen. That's on them. But we also saved the entire fleet by destroying that Void concentration. In war, you make hard choices." "This isn't war," Vesh said, his colors dark with anger. "This is madness, maybe," Harris agreed. "But we're winning, aren't we?" The Battle of Kelthera lasted 16 hours. When it ended, the Void Collective had been driven back. The planet was saved. The human fleet had lost 30 ships and 15,000 people. The assembly forces had lost twice that before the humans arrived. Dr. Lisa Morgan worked with assembly scholars to establish better communication. She sat in a room with beings from a dozen different species, all trying to understand these violent newcomers. "Why did you come?" asked one alien, a floating creature that communicated through color changes. "We dismissed you. We called you primitive. Why help us?" Lisa thought about it. "Because you asked." "Because it was the right thing to do. And maybe because we wanted to prove we're not what you thought we were." "You've proven you're terrifying," another alien said. "Your people fight like demons." "Only when we have to," Lisa said quietly. "We've seen what happens when good people do nothing. We've watched evil win because nobody stood up. We won't let that happen again." News of the human victory spread through assembly space faster than light. Species that had written humanity off as backwards primitives suddenly started paying attention. The creatures that lived in their isolated corner of space had destroyed a void collective fleet, using tactics that shouldn't work. Admiral Harris addressed his fleet after the battle. Every screen and every ship showed his tired face. We came here to help people who never helped us. Some of you were angry about that. I understand. But we didn't do this for them. We did it because it's who we are. We're the species that doesn't give up. We're the people who help even when it's hard. Today we saved billions of lives. Tomorrow we'll save billions more. He paused, looking at the camera. The assembly thinks we're chaotic and violent. They're right. But they're also learning that sometimes chaos is exactly what you need. Sometimes violence is the only answer to greater violence. We're not here to follow their rules or fight their kind of war. We're here to win. Across the fleet, humans cheered. They'd come to a strange part of space to fight aliens they'd never met, to save people who'd looked down on them. And they'd won the first battle. But Harris knew this was just the beginning. The Void Collective was vast and ancient. They'd been consuming civilizations for centuries. One victory wasn't enough. As the fleet prepared to move to the next battle, Harris looked at the stars and thought about humanity's place among them. The galaxy had called them primitive. Now the galaxy was learning that primitive didn't mean weak. It didn't mean simple or stupid. It meant humans had never forgotten how to fight for survival. And that was going to make all the difference. 3 weeks after the victory at Kelthera, the war had spread across 12 star systems. The human fleet split into battle groups, working alongside assembly forces. The results were mixed. Commander Luis Rodriguez crouched in the darkness of a Void Collective supply station. His team of 12 special operations soldiers moved silently through corridors that seemed to breathe. The walls were organic, pulsing with unnatural life. Somewhere ahead, the station's power core hummed. "This place gives me the creeps," whispered Sergeant Danny Martinez, his rifle tracking every shadow. "Stay focused," Luis said. They'd been behind enemy lines for 6 days, sabotaging Void infrastructure. The assembly said it couldn't be done. The Void ships were too well defended, too perfectly coordinated. But the assembly had never met human special forces. They reached the core chamber. The power source was a massive crystal that glowed with sickly green light. Living cables connected it to the walls, floor, and ceiling. Luis planted charges while his team watched the entrances. 30 seconds, he said into his comm. Then we run. They made it 15 seconds before the Void forces found them. Biomechanical soldiers poured from every opening, their weapons already firing. The humans fought their way out, leaving 3 team members behind. Luis triggered the charges as they reached their escape ship. The station exploded in silence. In space, there was no sound. But Luis could feel it in his chest as they jumped to safety. 3 good soldiers gone, but the station had been supplying 6 Void fleets. The loss would hurt the enemy badly. Back on the Indomitable, Dr. Kevin White studied samples from destroyed Void ships. He was a xenobiologist who'd volunteered for this mission, hoping to discover new life. He'd gotten his wish, but not in any way he'd wanted. "It's fascinating and horrible," he told Admiral Harris during their daily briefing. "The Void Collective isn't really a species. It's a corruption, a virus that takes over other species and links them into a hive mind. Can we cure it?" Harris asked. "I don't know yet, but I found something interesting. The hive mind needs a central processor, something to coordinate all the individual units. If we could find it and destroy it, the whole collective might collapse. Keep working on it. We need every advantage we can get." The joint operations with assembly forces were getting better, but tensions remained high. Captain Helen Brooks commanded a carrier group, working with an assembly fleet. The assembly admiral insisted on formal battle formations and scheduled engagement times. Helen ignored him and did what worked. "Your fighters are attacking without permission," the assembly admiral protested after one battle. "They saw an opportunity and took it," Helen said calmly. "That's what we trained them to do. Think for themselves. But that's chaos. How do you maintain control? We don't control them. We trust them." Helen smiled at the confused alien. "Our pilots are smart enough to make their own decisions. Aren't yours?" Lieutenant Sophie Turner proved Helen's point in the next engagement. Her fighter squadron was supposed to provide cover for an assembly cruiser. Instead, Sophie spotted a weakness in the Void formation and led her pilots through it. They destroyed a command ship before the enemy could react. The assembly cruiser's captain was furious that Sophie had abandoned her post. Then he realized her attack had saved his ship from a flanking maneuver he hadn't even seen coming. He filed a complaint anyway. "Your people are impossible to work with," complained Counselor Zethara, a senior assembly leader. She looked like a crystalline tree and communicated through vibrations. "They don't follow orders. They ignore protocol. They take insane risks." Ambassador Nicole Grant, humanity's diplomatic envoy, nodded patiently. "That's true. But they also win battles you said couldn't be won. They accomplish missions you said were impossible. Maybe our chaos is actually a strength." "Chaos is never a strength," Zethara vibrated firmly. "Then why are you winning now when you were losing before we arrived?" Nicole asked quietly. Zethara had no answer to that. The Battle of Nexus Corridor changed everything. It was a vital jump point connecting 5 systems. The Void Collective threw everything they had at it. If they took the corridor, they could split the assembly forces in half. Harris brought the entire human fleet to defend it. 200,000 assembly ships joined them. Against them came the largest Void Armada ever assembled, 500,000 vessels. "We're outnumbered 2-1, Amy said, studying the tactical display. "We've faced worse odds," Harris lied. They hadn't. This was going to be brutal. The battle lasted 96 hours without stopping. Human crews fought until they collapsed from exhaustion, then kept fighting. Ships that ran out of ammunition used themselves as weapons, ramming enemy vessels. Damaged vessels that couldn't fight anymore became shields for those that could. Danny Martinez led ground forces defending the corridor's station. The Void sent boarding parties that never stopped coming. For 4 days, his Marines fought in corridors and chambers, giving up ground slowly, making the enemy pay for every meter. "We're out of ammunition," reported one of his sergeants on the 3rd day. "Then use your knives," Danny said, blood streaming down his face from a head wound. "Then use your hands. We hold this station." They held. Sophie's fighter squadron flew mission after mission with no rest. Pilots passed out from exhaustion in their cockpits. Maintenance crews worked miracles, keeping the fighters flying on spare parts and prayers. By the 4th day, Sophie had been awake for 70 hours straight. "You need to rest," her wingman said. "I'll rest when we win," Sophie replied, launching for another sortie. The assembly forces watched in awe and horror. Human ships fought until they literally fell apart. Soldiers who should have surrendered kept fighting. Pilots who should have been dead from exhaustion somehow kept flying. "Don't they know when to quit?" asked one assembly captain. "No," answered his human liaison officer proudly. "We really don't." On the 4th day, the Void Collective finally broke. They'd never faced an enemy this stubborn before. Species they fought either surrendered when beaten or fought intelligently and withdrew when necessary. Humans did neither. They fought with absolute determination, refusing to acknowledge when they were beaten. The Void ships retreated. The Nexus Corridor was saved. The human fleet had lost 40% of its ships and 60,000 people. But they'd held. Admiral Harris stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, which was missing half its hull and running on emergency power. Around him, the surviving ships looked like they'd been through a meat grinder. Because they had. "Signal to all assembly forces," he said, his voice rough from days of shouting orders. "The corridor is secure." "We held the line, then he collapsed." Amy caught him before he hit the floor. The Admiral had been awake for all 96 hours, commanding the battle personally. His body finally gave out. As medics rushed to help him, Amy took command. She looked at the tactical display showing the destroyed Void fleet. "We won," she whispered. "We actually won." But the victory came with a terrible realization. Kevin White had been studying captured Void ships during the battle. He found what he was looking for, and it terrified him. "The Void Collective is learning," he reported to Amy while Harris recovered. "They're adapting to our tactics. They captured several human ships during the battle. They'll study them, understand them, and counter them." "How long do we have?" Amy asked. "Weeks, maybe days. They're evolving faster than any species I've ever studied." Amy looked at the exhausted fleet. They'd won a major victory, but the enemy was learning. The chaos and unpredictability that made humans dangerous wouldn't work forever. Eventually, the Void would adapt even to that. She made a decision. "Get me Luis Rodriguez, and wake up the Admiral. I don't care what the doctors say." Harris woke up 6 hours later to find Amy, Luis, Kevin, and several other senior officers waiting. "We need to change strategies," Amy said. "The Void is adapting to us. We can't just out-crazy them anymore." Harris sat up, ignoring the pain. "What do you propose?" "We go on offense. Kevin thinks he can find the Void's central hive mind. Louise thinks he can lead a strike team to destroy it, but it means taking the fight to their home territory, deep into their space. It's a suicide mission. Harris looked at each person in the room. They all knew how dangerous this was. They all knew most of them wouldn't come back. And they all wanted to do it anyway. When do we leave? Harris asked. As soon as you're able to stand, Louis said. Harris stood up. It hurt, but he stood. I'm able. Let's end this war. The plan was insane. It required every crazy tactic humanity had developed, and several they'd have to invent on the fly. It meant trusting the assembly forces to hold the line while humans went hunting. It meant gambling everything on one desperate strike. In other words, it was perfectly human. Word spread through both human and assembly forces. The humans were going to attack the Void Collective's home. The assembly species thought it was brave but pointless. They'd lost fleets trying similar operations. What made humans think they could succeed? But they'd thought human tactics wouldn't work either. They'd thought Kelthera couldn't be saved. They'd thought the Nexus corridor couldn't be held. They'd been wrong every time. Maybe humans could do the impossible one more time. The war room on the Indomitable was crowded with humans and aliens working side by side. Admiral Harris stood at the center, looking at a map of Void Collective space. Deep in enemy territory, a red marker pulsed, the suspected location of the hive mind's core. It's 300 light-years into void space, Kevin White said, pointing at the marker. Every scan we've done suggests this is the central processing nexus. Destroy it and the entire collective should collapse. Should? Asked Counselor Zethara. She'd started attending human strategy meetings after the Nexus corridor. Her crystalline form sparkled in the light. Biology isn't exact, Kevin admitted, but I'm 90% certain. Those odds aren't good enough, protested an Assembly Admiral. You're risking everything on 90%. Harris smiled grimly. In human history, we've done a lot worse on worse odds. We'll take it. The plan required splitting the fleet. Half would stay behind to defend assembly space. The other half would make the deep strike into Void territory. It was risky. If the Void Collective counterattacked while the fleet was divided, both forces could be destroyed. Then the situation got worse. Admiral, we're receiving reports from Earth, Amy said, her face pale. The Void Collective has launched a major attack on human space. They're heading straight for Earth itself. The room went silent. Every human officer felt their blood run cold. Earth, home, where their families lived, where humanity began, where everything they cared about existed. How long until they arrive? Harris asked, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. 6 days. Vice Admiral Rachel Stone is mobilizing the home defense fleet, but she only has 200 ships. The Void is bringing thousands. The choice was impossible. Go home and defend Earth or press the attack on the hive mind. Save their own world or save the galaxy. Every human in the room knew what they wanted to do. They wanted to go home to protect what was theirs. Harris closed his eyes. He thought about his sister who lived in London, his nephew who was just starting university in Tokyo. The billions of people who had no idea humanity was fighting for its survival among the stars. Then, he thought about the trillions of aliens who would die if the Void Collective wasn't stopped. The children on 100 worlds who deserved to grow up. The civilizations that had existed for thousands of years and would be erased if humanity failed. We press the attack, Harris said quietly. Rachel will hold Earth. We have to trust her. If we turn back now, we lose everything. Some officers protested. A few demanded to be sent home. Harris understood. He wanted to go home too. But leadership meant making choices when there were no good options. I'm not ordering anyone to come, he said. If you want to go defend Earth, I understand. But I'm going after that hive mind. Who's with me? Every human officer raised their hand. Even those who'd protested. They were scared, they were worried, but they were human. And humans didn't back down. The strike fleet assembled. 250 warships, 1,000 support vessels, and 50,000 soldiers. The assembly contributed their own forces. Zethara's species sent ships that could phase through solid matter. The Keltheran contributed vessels that manipulated gravity. The Vesh brought ships that could predict enemy movements. We're stronger together, Zethara vibrated to Harris before the launch. Your chaos and our order, your bravery and our wisdom. Together we might actually survive this. Might? Harris asked with a tired smile. I'm being optimistic. The fleet jumped into void space and immediately ran into hell. The Void Collective had been waiting. Thousands of enemy ships swarmed them from every direction. The battle was chaos from the first second. Helen Brooks commanded the carrier group at the fleet's center. She launched every fighter she had, 50,000 small craft that filled space like a metal swarm. Sophie Turner led the first wave, her voice calm over the comm as enemy fire filled the space around her. All wings pattern Delta 9. Make them chase you into the gravity wells. The human fighters dove toward a nearby planet, the void ships following. The Keltheran gravity manipulators activated, creating crushing forces that tore the void ships apart. The human fighters, built to handle high-G maneuvers, survived and came around for another pass. Luis Rodriguez's strike team launched toward a void command ship. Their small assault craft were nearly invisible to sensors, designed for special operations. They cut through the ship's hull and fought their way inside. The interior was a nightmare. Organic corridors pulsed with infected life. Creatures that had once been a dozen different species attacked with mechanical precision. Luis's team fought room by room, planting explosives as they went. Charges set, Luis reported. But we've got a problem. The ship's trying to assimilate our equipment. The charges might not work. Then improvise, Harris said from the Indomitable. Luis looked at his team. They understood what he was asking. Everyone out except me. I'll trigger it manually. Sir, that's a death sentence, said one of his soldiers. Then I better make it count. Move, the team evacuated. Luis stayed behind, watching the charges. The void ship's organic systems tried to absorb the explosives, converting them into harmless biomass. Luis waited until the conversion was almost complete, then fired his weapon into the charges. The explosion took him and the entire command ship. But before he died, Luis transmitted everything he'd learned about the Void's interior defenses. That information saved dozens of other boarding teams. Danny Martinez led the ground assault on a Void fortress world. His Marines dropped from orbit in armored pods, hitting the surface like meteors. The planet's surface was covered in biomechanical growth, a nightmare landscape of flesh and metal. This is like fighting inside a living creature, Danny reported as his troops advanced. Everything's connected. Everything fights back. They pushed forward anyway. Human soldiers used flamethrowers to burn away the organic growth. Engineers deployed special weapons that disrupted the Void's control signals. Medics worked in impossible conditions, saving soldiers who should have died. The battle lasted 3 days. When it ended, Danny had lost half his force. But the fortress world was burning, its ability to coordinate Void fleets destroyed. Back in human space, Rachel Stone fought the battle of her life. The Void fleet attacking Earth was massive, but Rachel had advantages. She was fighting in her home system. She knew every asteroid, every orbit, every hiding spot. Her ships used Earth's moon as cover, striking from behind it, then disappearing. They hid in the asteroid belt, waiting to ambush Void vessels. They even used old satellites and space junk as improvised weapons, accelerating them to deadly speeds and sending them into enemy ships. We don't need to win, Rachel told her captains. We just need to hold until Harris finishes the mission. Make them pay for every meter. Make them bleed for every second. The Earth fleet fought like cornered animals, because that's what they were. Humans protecting their home, their families, their world. The Void Collective had never faced anything like it. In void space, the strike fleet was closing on the hive mind's location. They'd lost 100 ships and 20,000 people, but they were still moving forward. Kevin White worked frantically in his lab, analyzing new void samples. I found something, he called to Harris. The hive mind isn't just biological. There's an artificial intelligence at its core. Something ancient. I think the Void Collective used to be a peaceful species. Then they found this AI and it corrupted them. Can you shut it down? Harris asked. Maybe. I'm finding patterns in its code, but I'd need to access it directly. Someone would have to get inside the hive mind's core facility. Harris looked at the tactical display. The hive world was visible now. A massive planet covered entirely in void biomechanical structures. Around it, 10,000 enemy ships waited. How many ships do we have left? He asked Amy. 150. Maybe less after the next engagement. And they have 10,000. Yes, sir. Harris nodded slowly. Then we'd better make this count. Signal the fleet. We're going in. All ships, all weapons. We end this today. The final assault began. The combined human and assembly fleet charged the hive world like a spear. The Void fleet tried to stop them, but couldn't match the desperate determination of people fighting for their homes, their families, their very existence. Zethara's phase ship slipped through the enemy lines, disrupting their formations. Helen's fighters swarmed enemy vessels, sacrificing themselves to create openings. Danny's surviving Marines launched toward the planet's surface in one final assault. And at the center of it all, Admiral Harris drove the Indomitable forward. His flagship was burning, losing atmosphere, falling apart around him. But he kept going. "We're reading a massive structure at the planet's core," Kevin reported. "That's it. That's the hive mind's central processor. Can you shut it down from here?" "No. Someone has to get inside and input the shutdown sequence manually." Harris looked at Amy. She looked back at him with understanding. One of them had to go, and they both knew which one it would be. "Amy, you have command of the fleet," Harris said. "Get our people home." "Sir, you can't." "That's an order, Commander." Harris smiled at his old friend. "Besides, somebody has to make sure this works. Might as well be me." Admiral Kyle Harris's assault craft screamed through the atmosphere of the hive world. Around him sat 5 volunteers, 2 engineers, 2 Marines, and Dr. Kevin White. They were the smallest team in human history attempting to end the largest war the galaxy had ever seen. The planet's surface was a horror. Organic towers stretched kilometers into the sky, pulsing with infected life. Rivers of biomechanical fluid flowed between structures. Everything was connected, everything was alive, everything was wrong. There. Kevin pointed at a massive structure at the planet's equator. "That's the core. The AI is in there." They landed hard, the craft's landing gear buckling on impact. The team rushed out, weapons ready. The planet itself seemed to notice them. The ground rippled. Void creatures emerged from every surface. "Move!" Harris shouted. They ran for the structure's entrance, fighting every step. The 2 Marines laid down covering fire while the rest sprinted forward. One Marine fell, pulled underground by reaching tentacles. The other kept firing until Harris dragged him into the building. Inside was worse. The corridors were alive, trying to digest them. The walls closed in, floor panels shifted, ceiling dripped with acid. Kevin led them deeper, following the signal from the AI core. They lost an engineer to a trap that crushed him between 2 walls. The remaining Marine died, holding off a swarm of void creatures at a junction. By the time they reached the core chamber, only Harris, Kevin, and 1 engineer remained. The AI core was beautiful and terrible. It was a sphere of pure energy, suspended in the center of a vast chamber. Around it, organic systems fed it information from across the Void Collective. Every thought, every action, every decision of billions of infected beings flowed through this single point. "How do we shut it down?" Harris asked. Kevin pulled out a device he'd built from salvaged Void technology. "I input the shutdown code here, but the AI will fight back. It'll throw everything at us. We need to hold this position for 10 minutes while the code propagates through its systems. Can you do it in less? Not without risking failure." Harris looked at the chamber's entrance. Already he could hear things coming. Thousands of things. "Then 10 minutes it is." The engineer set up defensive barriers while Kevin connected his device to the AI core. Harris took position at the entrance, rifle ready. They came in waves. Void creatures of every shape and size. Things that had once been people from 100 different species. Harris fired until his rifle overheated, then used his sidearm. The engineer threw grenades until they ran out, then used his tools as weapons. 5 minutes, Kevin called out, his hands dancing over the device. Harris's position collapsed. He fell back to the second barrier. The engineer went down fighting, buying Harris 20 more seconds. Now it was just the Admiral and the doctor alone in the heart of the enemy. 7 minutes, Kevin said. He didn't look up from his work. He trusted Harris to hold the line. Harris fired his last shots. Then he used his combat knife, then his hands. Void creatures piled up around him, but more kept coming. His body was covered in wounds. He was bleeding from a dozen places, but he didn't stop. 9 minutes, Kevin said. Almost there. A massive void creature broke through something that had once been a being from Zethara's species. It grabbed Harris and lifted him off the ground, its strength incredible. "Kevin?" Harris gasped. "How long?" 30 seconds. Harris pulled his last grenade from his belt. He'd been saving it. He armed it and jammed it into the creature's body, then kicked off hard. The creature exploded, buying precious seconds. Harris collapsed against the AI core, his body failing. He could see more creatures coming, too many. They weren't going to make it. Then the countdown hit 0. Kevin pressed the final sequence. The AI core flickered, and across the galaxy, every Void Collective ship stopped moving. The silence was absolute. On every battlefield, Void forces simply halted. The hive mind that controlled them was shutting down, processing the shutdown command, unable to resist the code that Kevin had created. On Earth, Rachel Stone watched in amazement as the enemy fleet attacking her planet went dark. "What happened?" she asked. "They stopped," her tactical officer reported. "All of them. They're just floating there." In the Nexus corridor, Danny Martinez watched void creatures collapse where they stood. "Is it over?" asked one of his Marines. "I think so," Danny said, hardly believing it. On the Indomitable, Amy Price saw the enemy fleet around the hive world power down. "Harris did it," she whispered. "He actually did it." She tried to raise him on the comm. "Admiral Harris, respond." "Kyle, please respond." There was no answer. The shutdown took 10 minutes to spread through the entire Void Collective. When it finished, trillions of infected beings simply stopped functioning. The hive mind that had controlled them for centuries was gone. Some of the infected died immediately. Others, whose original biology could survive without the Void control, began to wake up. These survivors were confused, traumatized, barely remembering who they'd been before the infection. But they were free. Amy led a team to the surface of the hive world. They found Harris in the core chamber, surrounded by dead void creatures. Kevin was trying to save him, but the wounds were too severe. "Did we win?" Harris asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes," Amy said, tears streaming down her face. "The void is gone. You saved the galaxy." Harris smiled. "Good, that's good." He looked at Amy. "Get our people home. Tell Rachel she did well. Tell Earth we won." "You can tell them yourself," Amy said desperately. "We'll get you to medical. We both know I'm not making it." Harris coughed, blood on his lips. "That's okay. I got to see the end of the war. That's more than most soldiers get." He died there in the heart of the enemy's greatest fortress, having accomplished the impossible. The war was over. The Void Collective was gone. But the cost had been terrible. Humanity had lost 200,000 soldiers and sailors. The Assembly had lost millions. Entire worlds had been devastated. The scars would last for generations, but they had won. The journey home took 3 weeks. The surviving human fleet limped back to assembly space, then to Earth. They found Rachel Stone's fleet battered but victorious, Earth intact and safe. When Amy Price returned to Earth, she carried Admiral Harris's personal effects and his final report. The Terran Coalition held a memorial service that lasted 3 days. Every name was read. Every sacrifice was honored. The galaxy had changed. The Assembly offered humanity full membership, leadership positions, anything they wanted. The aliens who had once dismissed humans as primitive now recognized them as saviors. Amy attended the Assembly Council meeting as the new human representative. Zathura herself proposed that humanity lead the new defense forces. "No," Amy said simply. The council chamber went silent. "You refuse?" asked Zathura. "We came to help, not to conquer. We fought because it was right, not because we wanted power." Amy looked around at the assembled species. "We'll join your assembly as equals. We'll work with you, learn from you, teach you what we can, but we won't rule you. That's not who we are." Zathara's crystal form sparkled with what might have been respect. "Then you truly are remarkable. Most species who saved the galaxy would demand tribute." "Most species aren't human," Amy said with a tired smile. The reconstruction began. Humans worked alongside aliens to rebuild destroyed worlds. Sophie Turner, now a captain, trained mixed squadrons of human and alien pilots. Danny Martinez helped establish joint defense forces. Kevin White worked with assembly scientists to ensure nothing like the Void could happen again. Jake Bennett returned to exploration, but now he traveled with alien crews. The galaxy that had seemed so empty before was full of friends and partners. Lisa Morgan became humanity's chief ambassador, helping species understand each other. She often thought about that first message, the desperate plea that had brought humans to the stars. 5 years after the war, a memorial station was built in orbit around the former hive world. The planet itself was being cleansed, the void corruption slowly removed. Eventually, it would be a garden world, a symbol of life defeating death. The memorial station held the names of every being who died in the war. Human, alien, it didn't matter. They were all there, carved in stone that would last 10,000 years. At the memorial's dedication, Amy Price gave a speech to representatives from every assembly species. "We came when you called," she said, "not because you deserved it, not because you'd earned it, but because you needed help, and we could give it. That's what humanity does. We help, we fight, we survive, and we never ever give up." She paused, looking at the names on the wall. These people died so that trillions could live. Remember them, honor them, and live lives worthy of their sacrifice. The galaxy honored them. Human and alien children learned about the war in schools. Songs were written, stories told, monuments built. The sacrifice was never forgotten, but perhaps the greatest legacy was simpler. Across the galaxy, when someone faced impossible odds, when the situation seemed hopeless, when giving up seemed like the only option, they remembered what humans had taught them. They remembered that impossible just means nobody's done it yet. They remembered that chaos can beat order. They remembered that stubbornness and determination can overcome any obstacle. They remembered to never give up. Humanity had come to the galaxy as outsiders. They'd been called